Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving deep into thousands of years of human history today, trying to figure out the exact mechanisms, the universal cheat codes really, that took us from floating atoms in a primordial petri dish all the way to massive global superpowers. We are going to look closely at how and why human civilizations actually rose to power. So how did we go from basically nothing to sprawling global empires? To understand this massive shift in the human story, we're extracting the absolute greatest hits from our source data. We're going to map out the specific, repeating pillars of power that essentially built the human world as we know it. It's a wildly fascinating journey, so let's just jump right in. Here's our roadmap for today. We've got 5 main pillars. First up, the agricultural foundation. Second, law and social order. Third, the divine mandate. Fourth, military might and tactics. And finally, wealth, trade, and alliances. All right, starting with number 1, the agricultural foundation. Okay, picture Mesopotamia around 4000 BCE, nestled right there between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The folks in Uruk made a massive pivot away from hunting and gathering. And through the frankly grueling invention of the hand mill, literally just crushing grains between heavy stones all day, they birthed agriculture. But, and this is wild, this new superpower came with a deeply ironic cost. Sure, cities like Uruk absolutely exploded to 50,000 residents, but the human body, it paid the price. We went from being these nomadic super athletes averaging 5'9" down to highly stressed landlocked laborers averaging just 5'3". It entirely shifted what it meant to literally be human. Meanwhile, over in China around 2100 BCE, getting a grip on agriculture introduced another huge mechanism of power. The Yellow River was notoriously unpredictable, constantly flooding and wiping out crops. But then, a guy known as Yu the Great spent 13 agonizing years building dikes and levees to tame the waters. He literally saved his people from starvation. And doing this established a totally crucial precedent, the idea that absolute power should actually be granted based on merit, on your actual ability to solve existential problems. Now, as these populations started ballooning, leaders desperately needed a way to keep things from falling apart. Which brings us to pillar 2, law and social order. The thing you really have to understand is that ancient rulers almost always operated on the assumption that humans needed incredibly strict control just to function. And this vibe is perfectly captured by legalism, a philosophy established in China by Han Feizi. His core belief? People are just inherently selfish. They're always going to act in their own self-interest. So in his view, the only way to keep a society together is by a powerful ruler enforcing crystal clear laws with absolutely brutal punishments. Because of this, the ancient world ran on incredibly strict social pyramids. Whether you're looking at King Hammurabi's Babylon, ancient Egypt, or medieval Europe, there was absolutely zero illusion of equality. I mean, look at Hammurabi's 282 laws. If you broke the bone of a noble, your bone was getting broken, no questions asked. But if you broke the bone of a slave, you just paid a fine. Your actual human value was literally dictated by exactly where you sat in that rigid social pyramid. So you really have to wonder, looking back at these strict setups, why would anyone willingly hand over their freedom just to be a peasant tied to the dirt all day? Well, think about the social contract of European feudalism. The masses gave up their crops and their autonomy to local lords purely out of survival instinct. It was basic necessity. They paid the ultimate price for safety because they needed those lords to protect them from terrifying foreign invaders, like the Vikings. Fear, as it turns out, is a remarkably effective organizer. But physical protection alone wasn't quite enough to glue these vast empires together. They needed a psychological unifier, and that is pillar 3, the divine mandate. It's so fascinating to look at how different civilizations justified all this power. On one side, you've got Egyptian pharaohs who were literally believed to be living, breathing gods walking the earth. They were absolutely obsessed with immortality, building these mind-boggling, monumental pyramids just so they could rule forever in the afterlife. But then on the flip side, you have Chinese emperors. They were viewed as mortals, regular guys who were just granted a temporary, conditional blessing from the heavens to rule. During the Zhou dynasty, this specific idea created a pretty brilliant political loop. Because the right to rule was directly tied to the emperor's virtue, it basically had a built-in reset button. If a massive natural disaster hit, like a horrible famine, a flood, or an earthquake, the people genuinely believed the heavens had spoken. It meant the current ruler had officially lost their divine blessing, and that legally and morally gave a brand new dynasty the green light to take over. All right, so once these societies got their internal affairs in order, the next inevitable step was aggressive outward expansion. Pillar 4, military might and tactics. The source data gives us this incredible juxtaposition in ancient Greece. On the one hand, you have Athens. We're talking a highly complex democracy using random sortition voting, a literal breeding ground for philosophical giants like Plato and Aristotle, and the builders of the Parthenon. And pitted directly against them, Sparta, a totally aristocratic society built entirely around brutal, lifelong physical conditioning that started in childhood and fueled completely by the forced labor of an enslaved class called helots. It's the ultimate showdown of the pen versus the sword. And history shows us that raw military power shifts hands incredibly fast. Aristotle's famous pupil, Alexander the Great, is the perfect example of this. In just a few ridiculously short years, he used vastly superior tactics to completely shatter the mighty Persian army and essentially conquer the known world. But military might is super fragile. When Alexander died suddenly at just 32 years old, his massive, sprawling empire almost instantly splintered into warring factions. It just goes to show that conquest alone is incredibly hard to sustain. The real mindset of these conquerors is brutally, and I mean brutally, captured in Niccolo Machiavelli's political manifesto, The Prince. His whole philosophy of prioritizing fear really gave a voice to the terror-driven strategies we've seen from conquerors throughout history. Leaders like Genghis Khan took this exact philosophy and weaponized it to the extreme. He used unprecedented fear tactics, psychological warfare, total destruction, and even human shields to quickly and ruthlessly subjugate millions. Actually, the sheer scale of Genghis Khan's expansion is almost hard to wrap your head around. He united the nomadic tribes, swept across entire continents, and left a genetic legacy so incredibly vast that an estimated 8% of South Asian men alive today are his direct descendants. Just think about that. That is the raw, astonishing footprint of absolute military domination. But thankfully, civilization isn't solely built on bloodshed. True global endurance requires a bit more nuance, which brings us to our fifth and final pillar: wealth, trade, and alliances. Way back in 1274 BCE, the Egyptians and the Hittites fought this incredibly gruesome battle at Kadesh that essentially ended in a draw. But rather than just fighting until both sides were totally wiped out, they pivoted. Ramesses II and Haile III actually signed the world's first recorded peace treaty, and because of this one alliance, they started trading. The Hittites shared their superior metalworking secrets, and the Egyptians shared their mastery of agriculture. It's a perfect example of how peace and shared knowledge can generate massive mutual prosperity. And we see this exact blueprint for power all over the globe. The Han Dynasty set up the Silk Road, creating an absolute monopoly that pulled in immense profits from Europe. Over in Africa, Mansa Musa literally possessed so much gold that he accidentally crashed entire local economies while on a pilgrimage. But he used that endless wealth to build the University of Sankore, turning Timbuktu into a major global hub for science and theology. Even the Aztecs built their staggering capital, Tenochtitlan, around these highly complex trade canals and innovative floating gardens. At the end of the day, controlling trade and wealth was the real key to controlling the course of history. So we've explored the really incredible mechanisms that built human civilization, from the bone-crushing labor of early agriculture and the strict, terrifying enforcement of laws to those divine mandates, brutal military conquests, and eventually vast global trade networks. But all of this really leaves us with a heavy question. When you factor in the immense loss of freedom for your average person, those painfully rigid social pyramids, and the endless cycles of war, what is the true, ongoing price of power as we continue shaping our modern world today? It's definitely something to chew on next time you look at the empires of our modern era. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.